Okay, good evening. This is the meeting of the Community Preservation Committee, scheduled pursuant to a notice posted with the town clerk for Wednesday, February 8th, 2023 at 7 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. Some of us are here live and others of the committee are logging in through Zoom. As we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic, we introduced the hybrid concept, noting former Governor Baker's emergency order, which allowed us to conduct public meetings or meetings in a hybrid format or by Zoom that comply with the open meeting law. And in particular, they comply by having members of the public log in through Zoom at the address noted in the agenda posted with the town clerk. The meeting is being recorded, so please note that. Be aware, for those of you who are logged in, that please do not share your screen. Other people may be able to see your screen, and anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All the meeting materials have been provided to the members of the committee unless otherwise noted. We will follow our usual ground rules, and what I'm going to do first is do a tech check, if you will, which will also be.
So Joe is saying he's on, and he's having trouble hearing you.
Okay.
But I
it's because of
don't-
the owl.
Yeah, you need to sit next to it.
I don't know if this might be him under a different name, so I'm gonna try to promote somebody who we don't know and hope that it's Joe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I may need to reset my Wi-Fi because I'm having trouble hearing you, Peter. I can only hear like every third word or so. You're cutting in and out.
I think that's us.
I'm gonna
Oh,
go
okay.
move. Okay, I will go closer to
Rick is in. If someone could let him in, Cecilia, he's in.
Yeah,
Okay, that experiment didn't work, so that's good to know.
It can work, but you have to set the owl in the middle of the table.
Well,
Yeah,
I guess we can-
but it's too late to sort of.
Well,
There he is.
Let's see if this works.
My apologies, that's never happened before.
No, me too. It's just a weird link. I don't think it's a lot of us had trouble. I think it just something was quirky with the link.
That's a good place for it. Try it out.
Okay, let's do this. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
I'm good.
Yes, sort of. I'll just have to wait and see as you continue to talk.
All right, you know what? I'm not afraid to speak loudly, that's fine. Okay.
Okay.
Right. This, I assume that, let me just summarize that this is our regularly scheduled meeting for February 8th at 7 p.m. We're meeting by hybrid. Some members of the public are logging in through the Zoom address that is posted at our meeting that's been noticed with the clerk's office. The materials should have been added to all of our CPC members. We have speakers tonight. And so we will be getting to them shortly, but let me use this opportunity to do both a tech check and a roll call. Okay. So Joe Barnes. Okay. Joe may be logging in later. Bob Dermody.
Here.
Laura Dorfman.
Here.
Reg Foster.
Present.
Dina Hannigan.
Here.
You hear me?
Yes.
Dave Harrod.
Here.
Can you hear me?
Oh, just barely.
You're finally getting my sense of humor. Okay, Jean McKnight is absent or she'll be late. Rick Zambone.
I am here and in communication.
Okay, good. And I'm Peter Banter, the moderator. Ground rules are the rules that we've been following since March of 2020. I'll
Peter,
introduce
you're the chair, not the moderator. You're the chair, right?
Did I say the moderator?
Yeah, we let it slip.
What did I say?
You said moderator and I smiled.
Oh, I identify myself as a moderator?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
I'm gonna tell Mike G.
He's announcing his candidacy.
Hey, watch out, Mike.
Excuse me, okay? I like that. I made a mistake and I'm sorry. Okay, I'm the chair. Apologies to Mr. Fee. I usually address him as Your Honor, so it's all square. Meeting ground rules, I'll introduce the speaker. The important part here is whoever is speaking must identify themselves on the record, either by name, either by me or by speaker, okay? We'll have the presentations, and then from there, we're gonna go, as we have done in the past, alphabetical order, so you can ask your questions, and then from there, it's raise your hand, and it's kind of a quick fire round, okay? So now we'll go to chairman's updates. Remember too that all votes will be by roll call vote. Chairman's updates. A couple of things regarding schedule. First of all, future scheduling. Our next, our meeting on February 15th, we will be hearing another presentation by the Housing Authority concerning seabeds and Cook's Way. On March 1st, we are possibly hearing a presentation by Claxton Field, but as you can see, what's trumped that perhaps is that we have, put this in your calendar, a joint meeting that was scheduled late in the day for, I have it in my calendar. Want to help me, Cecilia?
Yeah, it's next Wednesday, February 15th from 5:30 to 7. So it'll basically line right up with this meeting, and I'll make sure to try to get a room in town hall so we don't have to bounce between buildings, which is part of why we keep bouncing between buildings. But yeah, so we'll be addressing kind of what's going on with Claxton, what the town has found, what the town's plan is moving forward. And there is some talk within Park and Recreation and DPW regarding the Claxton project with keeping it in this year's funding cycle, but there's not right now. There may not be a desire to receive the money until the fall, just because we want to let what we'll talk about next Wednesday kind of play out. But we want it to be looked at in this year's funding cycle.
Okay, so that's all to be discussed. Okay, so we're in a kind of an unusual situation, but at the same time, there's a great deal of urgency in addressing the Claxton Field renovation issue. So put that in your calendar. It's a joint committee meeting, and we are one of the committees, right? On March 8th, that's our prep for public hearing meeting. What I would like to do is schedule that for 5:30. And that gives us 2 solid hours. I don't know that we need that much, because CPC is scheduled to present before the Finance Committee that same evening at 7:30 approximately. Okay. Then I'll just continue with keeping your calendar open. From Susan Welby, where on behalf of the League of Women Voters, the warrant meeting is scheduled for Monday, April 24th at 7 p.m. So the liaisons plan on attending that meeting. Anyone else who's interested should plan on attending as well. And it's really efficient for us to have a member in each of the separate precinct meeting classrooms. We usually have 2 precincts to a classroom, so we need approximately 5 members. Okay, so put that in your calendar,
Same format as last year.
and we'll run the same format. Okay, and they like that format. We like that format. We'll do the same. Okay. Then finally, Susan Welby, wearing her hat as our appointee to the working group, emergency working group for outdoor resources, they've had meetings, and she is going to be presenting to us, giving us a summary of her meetings to date. And I asked her to come in next week, 2:15. Maybe we could just squeeze her in for a few minutes at the beginning of the meeting.
Excuse me, Peter, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, you don't need to interrupt. I'll call on you. You raise your hand, I'm gonna call on you. Okay, so, okay, now, okay, sure, go right ahead.
Thank you. My raise hand feature is missing, so that's why I did that. I was just writing this down and which meeting was at 5:30? That was next Wednesday?
No, the 5:30 yes, the joint committee meeting. So
Yeah.
that would be for 5:30 next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
And then also March 8th.
And March 8th, our regularly scheduled CPC meeting is also scheduled for 5:30.
Okay, thank you.
Send out an updated calendar.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
I'm marking up this email that I got from Cecilia dated January 12th,
Yeah.
but you can, okay? Okay. I think that's it for announcements. Just let me check my notes, if you will, just indulge me in this. Okay. So I think we're ready for our presentation tonight on 2024-01. It's NHA application for Linden Chambers. And identify yourselves for the record, the presenters. And we've seen the slides, so we can go from there. Okay.
I will promote,
Now,
and I can pull up the slides or anything.
Yeah, would you mind doing that?
so I've said this in prior meetings and I'll say it again, which is we're meeting by Zoom. Members of the public are listening. This is not a public hearing. This is a meeting. And so we are not in a position to take comments or questions from the listening audience. But if you do have questions as a result of the presentation, we do a pretty good job of responding if you send an email. And what's really important is to please show up by Zoom or in person at our public hearing. And that's when we take all comments and questions from the public.
Okay, shall I take it from here?
Take it from here, Reg and Mark. Reg.
So let me introduce our guest here tonight. To my right, I have Margaret Moran, who is Deputy Executive Director of the Cambridge Housing Authority in charge of planning and development, and so is the principal in charge of the Cambridge Housing Authority consulting engagement where they've been helping us since mid-2021. And then on Zoom, you see Natalie Jansen waving at us, or Janssen, if we pronounce her name right, Natalie Jansen. And she is our project manager for all the work that has been done by CHA for the Needham Housing Authority. And I'm going to turn over the baton to both of them to go through this presentation. I just also wanted to thank Bob Dermody and Laura Dorfman and Rick Zimbone, who have invested a lot of time since we last met. We've met twice with them and given us lots of good suggestions and construction criticism and so forth, and helped us try to get the packet that you received yesterday from Cecilia, which was mostly, besides the presentation, was mostly just a refinement and an update to the detailed questions and the covering of about a half a dozen of additional questions that came in on February 1st. Otherwise, it's the same as the preliminary one that went out in mid-January. So let me turn it over to you, Margaret and Natalie.
Sure. So I'm Margaret Donnelly Moran. I'm the development consultant for Needham Housing Authority, working on a number of different engagements, but one of them being the Linden and Chambers redevelopment. And so if we can go to the next slide, just our agenda tonight is just, again, a little bit of background information on the Needham Housing Authority, talk about their preservation and redevelopment initiative that's ongoing, and then really focusing in on Linden Chambers by going through existing conditions as well as the detail of what our funding application is for this year's CPA. Next slide, please. So Needham Housing Authority was formed in 1948. I did the math. I think you're on your 75th anniversary, so you're gonna have to
Really?
be planning some type of party. But, you know, it has a long-term history, as many housing authorities do in their community, been serving the Needham community for 75 years. It's an institutional owner that's been here and will be here. And I think that's always an important element and aspect of a housing authority. The mission of the housing authority is to be an excellent landlord and preserve and create deeply affordable housing in Needham. In terms of affordability, it's the largest landlord in Needham, providing affordable housing. Manages a mixture of state and federally assisted units, 336 in total. 152 is actually a little bit more because you've got your special needs housing.
160.
160 units of state assisted housing, primarily based at Linden and Chambers. And then their federal portfolio is at High Rock Homes, and then at Seabeds and Cook, and that's 136 units. 42 acres of land is under the control of and ownership of the Needham Housing Authority. And as mentioned, all the units are deeply affordable, which means the rent that a resident pays is based on a percentage of their income. So if they have a little bit of income, they pay a little bit of rent, 30% of their income. And if they are higher income, then they pay a higher percentage of the rent, but it's always based on 30% of income. And that differs from other affordable housing programs. You'll hear about affordable. It may not be deeply affordable, and it may not take into consideration what the family's income is. In addition to the units that the Housing Authority owns and operates, they also manage the Section 8 program, where they provide individual families with rental subsidy to rent private apartments at an affordable level. The Housing Authority relies on state and federal public housing funds, both for their operating costs and capital costs. State resources have been particularly very constrained, and we'll be hearing a little bit more about that as we talk about Linden and Chambers. The state has had a hard time dedicating or allocating funds to cover operating costs, and there's always been a huge cost or huge gap in funding capital work. And that's not unique to Needham, that's across the Commonwealth. It's just been a program that's been critically underfunded for really decades. I've been working in the public housing field for over 30 years, and it's been a struggle all 30 plus years of my time. Next slide. So the Housing Authority has been launched in 2021, but I think the work actually predates that, where they were looking at the need and opportunity, the need to preserve and protect the resources that they have that need to be upgraded and brought into today's standards, but then also looking at the opportunity they have to potentially expand their portfolio. But it really, I think, you know, the fresh start of what has been designated as a preservation and redevelopment initiative started with our engagement, and with the goal of really recapitalizing and redevelop the Housing Authority's portfolio. And the goals on the slide talk about, you know, preserving and protecting the existing federal public housing units at Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook Road. The 152 units, the 72 at Linden Street and the 80 at the adjacent Chambers Street, have been always talked about a potential of redevelopment, and we'll talk about why that is a redevelopment rather than a modernization project as we get into existing conditions. And then take advantage of the land that it owns at High Rock Homes, and take advantage of work that began 10, 15 years ago when 20 of the original 80 single-family homes were torn down and replaced with duplexes. I think at that point in time and still today, the Housing Authority has envisioned replicating that earlier effort that I think folks have deemed pretty successful to again provide an expansion of affordable housing as a future activity. And then in a study that was done pre-2021, there was some identification of opportunities to build new units of senior housing on some underutilized NHA land. So the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative has the potential of funding or moving $250 million of improvements to the Housing Authority's portfolio, which obviously would transform the housing that it offers, as well as hopefully in the process expand the resources that it offers as well by adding units. Next slide. So to focus more on the two properties that are part of the CPA funding applications, as I mentioned, it's 152 units. They're side by side. State public housing, Linden, which is kind of the bungalow style right across from the High Rock Home School and Field, are 72 studio units. They were built in 1959 in 1962. The adjacent, and now a single story. The adjacent Chambers Street property was built a few years later, or a decade later, in 1972. Two-story walk-up buildings, again, all studios, ranging between 405 to 430 square feet in size. They're actually 50% undersized to what today's affordable housing standards would be in terms of creating a one-bedroom. The state agency designates that as 600 square feet. And as mentioned, the housing is deeply affordable. Again, the rent is based on the 30% of the residents' income. The major issues at the site, as I mentioned, the units are grossly undersized. The state has not had, as I mentioned earlier, capital funding to really allow the housing authority to address systems as they based in place. So you have original kitchens and bathrooms and original plumbing and electrical. They've done some work, but the guts of the building date from the original time that the property was constructed and are, hitting 50 to 60 plus years of age and at a point where they need to be replaced. Conditions, and we'll show photos in a moment, are, the numerous elements are in really poor condition. There's a general lack of overall accessibility, both in terms of how you get into your apartment. You'll note the stairs into the first floor units at Linden that exist also at Chambers. Chambers is also burdened by the fact that the second floor, half of the units are on second floors, and you have to go up a flight of 10 to 12 steps to actually even get to the hallway where you can access your units. The small sizes of the apartments also contribute to a lack of accessibility. Particularly as folks age in place, sometimes they need the benefit of a walker or a cane, or they just need to have some space to be able to get maneuver through their kitchen or their bathrooms, but they're the tiniest of spaces. And it really makes it hard for folks to gracefully age in place. And oftentimes when those elements are required, the folks can't really continue to live at either site. And then given the ages of the properties, they are extremely energy inefficient. No one knew what insulation was back in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And there's a real opportunity, and the existing windows are also not very energy efficient. So there's a real opportunity to really increase the sustainability and resiliency of the housing that is offered. So this is our kind of primary focus of this CPA application and kind of some of the major issues there. So just turning to a few photographic elements on Main Street, hard to see because it's a little dark inside, but you're basically seeing the full living room and bedroom area of that unit. There's studios, so you have a 3/4 wall, no door. And then off to the left of by the bedroom would be the access to the bathroom. And then off to also on the left, but off from the living room is the access to a very small galley kitchen. And as I mentioned, they're just 405 square feet. And then as you can see in the second picture on the top, the middle one, the access into the units, to many of them are via steps. So you have the inaccessibility elements there. Site paving is in poor condition, got original kitchens and bathrooms. Bathrooms have tubs, which was the feature of the day. We've been, as part of the renovation work, I've been doing the elderly developments. We've been actually moving tubs and putting in walk-in showers again to help elders more gracefully age in place. And then, we could have taken any number of pictures kind of documenting kind of deteriorating conditions or conditions that are less than desirable. We have one showing some deficiency around the building envelope. But, again, the state has really been limited to what resources they have available. They're just, it is not unique to Needham. It's across the board. I can go to any community and basically tell the difference between federally assisted public housing that has had a more steady stream of capital funding and operating subsidy in state. And the state has really struggled to figure out how it's going to capitalize and reinvest in its properties, and they continue to struggle on trying to figure that out. So then if we go to the next slide, a little bit more focused on the 2-story buildings on Chambers Street. Again, the paving and sidewalks have not seen upgrades in many years. You can see the stairs that go up from the first floor to the second floor. And again, half the units are inaccessible. The laundry room is on the second floor. So even if you can't, even if you can get into your units, you still can't access a major common feature of the property given its location. And again, undersized studios, you can see on the top picture, slightly different look. They don't have a fixed wall. They have a movable bookshelf that it's on wheels that you can move from one side to the other to define your kitchen, your kitchen, your living room, and your bedroom space.
I'll jump in, having been in there too. This room is approximately 2 apartments that we're in right here today, just if you want to imagine it that way.
Yeah, it's a very good visual. So the goal for the Housing Authority for a number of years has been to redevelop Linden and Chambers. Particularly, we know the goal for Linden Street is to do the redevelopment. Is really inefficiency of the space is not a way that you can really reuse that space without losing lots of units. And you do have the opportunity of potentially gaining units if you look at Linden Street. Chambers, we want to look at and figure out whether it can be comprehensively modernized and it makes sense to do that, or should it also be potentially teared down and replaced. There's one scheme where potentially between the 2 buildings that are on one side of the site and in the other that you could put a new addition that could house an elevator and some new units. I think that's something that ought to be looked at and compared to, something that would be a little bit more involved. But we included a study or a picture from a 2013 study that Needham Housing Authority did that just showed a little bit of the potential of the Linden and Chambers site, just to kind of give you a sense of, what the architectural team that we've hired is going to be looking at and what they'll be bringing to the resident community at Linden Street and Chambers, but also to the larger community as the design work progresses. So last year, after a lengthy conversation with the DHCD, we were able to get their consent to move forward and hire an architectural firm. Needham Housing Authority set up a local designer selection committee that included representatives of the community as well as the Housing Authority and resident community to interview the applicants who applied for the project. And they selected Barbara Henry, an architect of a Boston firm, to handle the architectural work. And the work is divided into 2 stages. The first stage is kind of the master plan of the site to figure out what the potential is for Linden, and then to really evaluate Chambers to figure out, whether it's best suited for a comprehensive modernization or a redevelopment, and to present those findings to the community, get consensus around or clarity around what might be the best one to pursue, and then take us through the zoning process to get the required zoning in place for the project to move forward. And then the second design stage is related to actually then moving forward with construction for what we're calling construction phase 1 for the Linden project, which we expect or would hope to be able to move forward into construction sometimes towards the mid to fall of 2024. So the design work is ongoing. We had a kickoff meeting about 2 weeks or so
The
ago.
9th of January.
With the residents, and then we've been meeting regularly with the architects. And so the firm is engaged, and we'll be working on that master plan and then eventually that zoning package between now and the fall of 2023. And then after we have zoning in hand, and we would release them to do the construction documents for construction phase 1. So we've developed 2 potential scenarios for construction on Linden. A small one, which is I think the one that you all saw last year, which was a 62 unit project, basically tearing down 28 units, 7 buildings, and then replacing them with a building typology that would have up to 62 units of housing. And so that's still being considered, but we also added the potential of replacing all 72 as a phase 1 project, and replacing them with 128 units. And we're not certain yet which will be the most beneficial one to go. It will be dependent upon the availability of local, state, and federal resources and relocation resources. One of the things that is in play now is ARPA funds that the state has that may make accessing funds for affordable housing a little bit more readily available near term than if you were to wait for 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, because those funds won't be there. I know DHCD has a lot of ARPA funds and special home funds that came out of the American Recovery Act that are part of the money that will be rolling out over the next few years, which is why we felt it was prudent to start thinking about perhaps something more than 62, but I think it really will be dependent upon what resources we think are available and what kind of feedback we get from the state and the local government, as well as some of the activity that the housing authority is doing around repositioning its federal portfolio. The sources of funding, so permanent debt is the amount that the housing authority can support after paying for the operating costs of running the property. And one of the things we are sizing differently than they have right now is that operating cost. So the housing authority and the state public housing program gets about $5,400 a year to operate a housing unit, which is really well below industry standards. And so we're running the numbers at $9,000 per unit, which will really, the question is, you're going to spend all this money to build something new. Are you actually going to be able to manage it? So we've already built into the budget that higher amount. And so the permanent debt supported above that is the amount of extra income the housing authority projects to get from the new rent structure or operating subsidies that they would have in play. The low-income housing tax credit program is a program, I talked a little bit about that last year, where the federal government and state government offers incentives, tax incentives to folks who are willing to invest in affordable housing. They give you $1 for affordable housing, they get $1 of tax credits. Oftentimes they give you 90 cents instead of $1, they still get the $1, but that's the profit or rate of return that they get through that. The state has a variety of subordinate funding programs. Some of it's related to transportation, affordable housing trust, housing stabilization funds. There's a whole different menus, ARPA funds now, home funds. Those would be the category that would fall into subordinate funding. We'd also be looking to tap into state public housing modernization funds for Linden and Chambers, given the fact it is state public housing and we're moving it off of the state public housing programs potentially. And the state has been known to provide some significant funding for agencies that do that. And then the last two would be, funding from the CPA program, as well as potentially some funding that the Needham Housing Authority would be able to contribute from some of its repositioning activities from its federal program. So we just we thought this was a helpful slide to show kind of how we envision kind of a smaller phase, larger phase. So the slide on the left, or the image on the left, shows what potentially would be the phase one of a 62 unit development, where we would again tear down 7 of the buildings and then replace them with 62 units. And then, if we were to go with the larger project, we'd have 128 units. And we would be touching all of the buildings. We may close on the financing for that phase, that construction phase all at once, so it would be a phase one construction project, but it actually, in effect, the contractor may build a portion of the site first, so that we would then be able to relocate residents from the remaining units to the new units, and then they would build out the site. Because relocation is going to be certainly a challenge, and something that, as we progress the design and understand how the financing is coming together, is something that we're going to have to really address in detail with the residents, and work with them to make certain that, and with the Housing Authority, to make certain that we have all the resources in place to make sure that residents' needs are met throughout the process. So in 2022, the Housing Authority secured, really based on the efforts of Representative Garlick, $2.75 million in state funding for phase one of Linden and Chambers. And that was a combination of dedicated ARPA funds. So when the legislature was given ARPA funds to allocate to agencies, there was some ability on behalf of some legislators to earmark funds, and your representative earmarked $1.25 million of funds specifically to the Linden and Chambers project. And prior to that, they were able to secure $1.5 million from an economic development bill as well. It's earmarked. It hasn't been allocated yet, but it again is identified for Linden and Chambers. And our belief is that once we have a project that's moving to closing, those funds would be made available from the bonds that have been approved. But they make decisions every year of which projects will move forward based on where they are in the pipeline, and whether or not they're actually moving towards construction. And so that's a huge jump forward to accessing the state funds that we would need. Certainly for the 62 unit option, and you really have secured the bulk of what you would need to replace the 28 public housing units. And it would be an easy ask to get the balance from the public housing side of DHCD to cover their portion of the expense. And then the balance of the subordinate financing from the state would come through supporting the production of the new units. There would be 28 replacement units, so 34 new units, and that would open the door to a different type of funding from the public housing program that is reflected in the state subordinate funding. So when I look at either column, but particularly that first column, the achievability of actually putting together the what I call the capital stack of financing for a project like that to move forward it makes me feel very encouraged that we have an absolute path forward to that. And again, I think there may be a path forward depending upon certain aspects from the Needham Housing Authority as it relates to its federal repositioning that could help the 128 unit building move forward. So I just want to highlight that for every CPA dollar as we move towards construction, through construction, your leverage is as best as it can get. $7.48 for the 62 unit project, almost $11 for the larger project. And even today, given the work that Representative Garlick has done, there's already $1.08 for what we're asking for every dollar of CPA funding. So that the CPA support has already been critical in making a Linden and Chambers project viable and something that the representative could then work to earmark the funds available, or earmark the funds for the availability of the Linden and Chambers project. So we just wanted to highlight, so one of the other tasks that we're working on with the Needham Housing Authority is looking at their federal public housing program. And the HUD has given housing authorities a lot of different tools to enable housing authorities to reinvest in their federal public housing program. And one of the tools that we're looking at for Needham Housing Authority would potentially, I call liberate federal public housing operating subsidy that would no longer be needed at the Needham Housing Authority's federal public housing programs, because they'll have moved over to the Section 8 program, to the voucher program. But the access to or the availability of using what had been the source of funding for seabeds in High Rock and Captain Robert Cook could be reused someplace else and could be potentially reused to help support the redevelopment of Linden and Chambers. And so, you know, particularly when we look at the 120 unit project, you know, as the purple bubble says at the top, you know, potentially, you know, the public housing conversion of the federal side may free up up to 108 units of those federal subsidy dollars that could be used to really support the housing authority's efforts at Linden and Chambers, which I think is really key to why I even think, you know, there would be a possibility that we would be able to look at something bigger than the 62 units, which is why we're saying that we've got both options on the table, and depending upon what happens to that repositioning effort, which is moving forward, and the timing of things, it could all come together in a way that would be really beneficial to a larger scale project at Linden and Chambers. So our request this year is $1 million, $1,165,000. Just kind of housekeeping things. It is an eligible activity under the CPA rules because of it falling into the creation of community housing. And so, you know, we don't have any question or doubt about that. The request is to cover pre-development costs to make construction phase 1 shovel ready. So we're looking to have the funds so that they could fund out the A&E work for both the stage 1 part of the project, that was that master plan phase of it, but also stage 2, which would be developing the plans and specs and bidding for construction and actually overseeing the actual construction. And then the third piece is just related to, you know, at some point we'll be submitting a competitive application to the state, and the state really looks to see what the level of community support has been, you know, and I think that the level of community support in a community that has CPA funding is really viewed as if having been successful with as the community showing support through the allocation of CPA funding. So the projects to really score well and be a strong application, having a really robust CPA funding is really key to that. And again, not only does it show financial support, it shows the local commitment of local dollars. And then key to, you know, any successful application will be, you know, we've talked about zoning, continue to focus on zoning. It will be key element, because the state doesn't like to commit projects to doesn't like to commit funding to projects if they don't have the zoning in place, because they don't want to have their money tied up in something that's not going to move forward. So that getting that zoning in place later this year will be a critical element in terms of being able to show the state along with the CPA funding that the project is shovel ready. So the next slide really, you know, goes through the pre-development budget for the project and highlights kind of the total number of of cost, and then show, so that's the left side of the slide, and on the right side shows the pre-development sources that have already been provided to the project. So just going down the uses, the A&E fee for zoning is really the actual fee that we have with the A&E firm for that stage one work. You know, we talked about it being in 2 stages. So that's the value of the stage one work. The second line, the $435,000 line item, that's for stage 2, the actual production of the construction drawings related to, and bidding related to phase 1 construction. Then A&E reimbursables is $75,750. That's for a variety of due diligence work that the A&E does that is not part of the basic service, but part of the design work they need for something like a wetlands engineer would be a reimbursable expense. Traffic study would be a reimbursable expense. So part of the due diligence they would need to do. CHA's consultant development fee for the process. Legal fee, not only to handle the zoning, but then all of the pre-financial closing tasks associated, not all of them, but the task to get the London inequity in place. And then now we have a typo here for third-party due diligence, which would be environmental review and title report. I think it's meant to be $8,800, not 88 something dollars. But the pre-development total is 2.365 million. Similar to what we did last year, we've added a 10% contingency, which has been very helpful on our prior funding. So the full ask of pre-development is just a little bit over $2.6 million. And the funding sources are shown on the right side. We're showing a fiscal year 2023 allocation that we received last year as 1.386. The application asked for this year is 1.165. And then the Housing Authority will be covering the small balance in between to bring us up to the full pre-development budget.
Margaret, I think that's supposed to be 88,000, not 8,800. Yeah,
Okay, sorry.
if you take a look here,
on that
just to
page.
refresh your memory.
All right.
It's all for all those third-party
Oh, I was
studies. that
thinking
we have.
this A&E
Yeah, that's right. 88,000. Sorry about that.
Okay. I knew it wasn't right, but I know the
Yeah.
bottom line number is
Yeah.
correct. And so then just to, talk about the difference between the ask of 2024 with the award from last year from 2023, the next slide shows the allocation between what we asked for last year. Last year, the A&E zoning was our estimate of what we thought it was going to cost. We hadn't issued out the RFP or gotten proposals on costs from the A&E. The number for that's in the 2024 column is the actual cost. So there was a $400,000, $406,000 difference. Again, we did not include in last year's ask the actual construction drawings and bidding. We really had just assumed we would get to zoning and we hit a pause. But I think we with the our opera funds and the other fundings there, that the ability to actually go into construction drawings just made sense to make certain that we had the funding for that that piece of the work. We talked about the A&E reimbursables, the wetland engineer and geotech, our fee, legal for zoning and funding, and then the other due diligence task. So you can sort of see what would be, what was anticipated to be funded and was funded in the 2023 proposal, and then where we are today and what the ask is. And again, one of the key things is, the production of the construction drawings and completing the construction bidding so that we'd be able to start construction on phase 1 of Linden, being really the defining key difference between 1 and 2, obviously with the exception of the correction of actual numbers versus estimates. I think we've covered that already in terms of that. And then we're at the bottom line. So why is this needed? So it is, funding is being sought and the project moving forward is needed to replace existing obsolete housing. You know, as we mentioned, the current units at London Chambers have critical deficiencies and are not really meeting the needs of the current residents. Been something that's been identified for well over a decade as something that needed to be done. And then there's opportunity to actually potentially increase density and expand the number of units on the site. So not only do you fix the right to ship of what's wrong with the existing units, but you could get the opportunity to expand and further meet the housing needs of the community. In terms of the benefits, you know, the CPA funding is key source to move the project from zoning approval towards construction. It really, as you mentioned, is key to our ability to leverage other state funding. It really is an element that the state looks at hard to see what the community support is. As we mentioned, you know, the funding will set us up to move forward with a phase 1 construction project, which will either be 62 units or 128 units to be determined as we go through the master plan. And then all of the units will all of the replacement units and all of the new units will remain affordable under a long-term use restriction under the control of the Needham Housing Authority, which goes back to Needham being 75-year history with the community and not looking to go away. And then the leverage is again pretty significant. And it has been, I know it was a major goal of the prior housing plan, but the one that was just completed and issued, it's also a priority for that as well. I think, does that take us close to the end? One more. I think that's the end.
Okay, so what we'll do is, thank you, Margaret. We'll follow our regular course. I'm going to call on each member in alphabetical order, and you can ask questions and make comments. And then we'll go through a full round of that. And then you can use your raise your hand function, or you can wave your hand. Wave both your hands. All right, so let's start. Now, is Joe Barnes in?
No.
Okay. Oh, you know what? Just give me a second. Okay, no. Okay, so let's go now to Bob Thurman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Page 15, please. The chart that showed the difference in the request. I'm just trying to understand it and make sure everybody does too. So for example, that first line, the increase of AE zoning from 1 million to 1.4 million. So it's an increase of 400,000?
Yeah.
Okay. And that was due to the timing it was done and what needed to be done and.
Yeah, so when we came in for 2023, we came in on an estimate.
Okay.
And so, the number is the number that came out. I mean, DHCD is pretty prescriptive about how they set the fee for A&E budgets. We did not have that information or knowledge when we did the estimate. It was based on what we thought it would be in that range. But when DHCD approved the RFP, the fee that was associated with the stage 1 master plan was set at the $1.4 million number.
And that's drawings and information and research to make a case to the town of Needham zoning and ultimately town meeting
Yes,
to change zoning,
yes,
which is not a guarantee.
no.
Okay,
Because
Just-
it's all dependent
Yep.
upon, it's dependent upon the community support.
right.
You know, and, you know, and there will be different options available in terms of, you know, whether you would go through town meeting to get zoning relief.
Right.
Or whether you would do a local initiative petition, or
Right,
would
and
you
then-
do something called the friendly 40B.
Right.
But, you know, obviously, it's gonna have to go through a lot of hurdles
But
to
this-
get zoning in place.
Okay.
And, you know, just, you know, the way it kind of gets defined is it goes through what's called the schematic design phase, because you have to have that level of detail to actually put the zoning in place, and then the site stuff goes actually a little bit further. So it represents about 35% of the actual overall design. Or A&E contract.
I'll stop there for now and then I'll jump back in the lightning round.
Okay, Laura, Laura.
Sorry, took me a little while to unmute. Margaret, thank you so much for this, and I apologize because I know that we met last week and talked about this presentation. But now looking at it, I just have a couple of questions and comments. So on page 16, that same page, and maybe it's, and I'm also looking at separately page 12, I guess. I'm wondering, you mentioned ARPA funds. I don't see that as a possible source of funding on, I'm sorry, it's page 12. Where would those come into play?
They would show up in the DHCD subordinate funding line item, so that you would
Okay.
already have of that 8, you know, if you were in the 62 unit project, that
Got it.
8.49 million would include the 1.25 million in ARPA, plus the 1.5 million in the economic development bill. So it's kind of embedded in that number.
Okay, okay. And just so everybody knows, I don't know if people know that, it's the American Recovery, what is it? Something Act and Preservation, something. And it's this whole bucket of money from, it's been allocated for a whole bunch of things to cities and states. And so I just wanted to share that with you. It's also funding this down payment program called the American Dreams, which is helping people buy homes, but in any event. So I think overall, so I was looking at the requests from last year and the requests from this year. And we already in last year's presentation discussed a lot about the need and the property conditions, right? And why this has to be done. So I feel like maybe we should condense that piece a little bit, just because it's already there, we know. Just because we want people to focus on like what's happening now and going forward. So the other comment I would make is that if there was some sort of FAQ or some explanation of, here's what we requested last year. What was done with the funds last year, and you explain it. And what will these funds be used for the current year? Because it sort of looks a little redundant if you compare the two requests from, you know, last year and this year. And I'm sorry that I sort of wasn't thinking about that when we had our meeting, but it's just coming to me now. So I think more conciseness on the why. We've expressed that already, and more connection from last year's request, like sort of the flow from last year's request to this year's request. I don't know, Reg, does that make sense?
I think, you know, I think we should test that out and see if there's consensus on that around the committee.
Okay, that's fine. I just don't want to make a long presentation that's redundant. You know, I know we need this. We presented this in this way last year and we have that data. I'm just not sure we need to repeat the whole, you know, 3 or 4 slides on why. And
Let's stick to questions and comments, and you can deal with actually how they're going to deliver it at a later presentation offline as to role as liaison. Okay. So if we have questions.
But no, I understand that, but Peter, I think it's important because people are going to look at this from town meeting and say, wait, we already gave money for design pre-development funds last year, and now they're asking for the same thing again, and people need to understand why there's a difference.
Okay, that's a different comment. That's fine. I understand. Okay. Okay,
So no,
all right. I'm sorry, Laura, but anything else?
All set, thank you.
All right, I didn't mean to cut you off. I wanted to get some questions out there about the actual, so to the balance of this committee, this is the first time that we are really digging in, or having dug in, this is the first time for us to actually interact with the proponents. So, and I know that, just to unpack what I was trying to say was that the delivery of the slides, it's great. You have comments on how they should do that in future presentations. I think that's really helpful. But if we have questions about actual presentation, let's deal with those. So again, Laura, do you have any other questions on?
I am all set, thank you.
Okay. All right. But Reg, we're going to skip you
Yep.
for now. Okay. If you have questions, you're in trouble. Dina Hannigan.
Yes, hold on. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Laura actually read my mind. I think just to compare, like a comparative of what's changed or different from last year would be very helpful for town meeting. And then my only question is, there was a brief mention of maintenance once the project is done. And I think that's really important to highlight for sure. Is there any sort of, and I'm sure there is, I'm just not finding it, a line item or a estimate for kind of maintenance for the short term once the project is done?
it's not in the presentation, but it is factored into how we calculate the amount of debt that the property can support. But
Okay,
I think we could add a bullet and really highlight, kind of what I had mentioned, kind of the right sizing of the
right.
operating to ensure that the property can be well maintained going forward.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. That is all I have.
Thanks, Dina. Dave Herod.
Yeah, I thought it was a great presentation, very informative. One thing I wasn't clear to me, and maybe I didn't read the, other materials clearly, but has any of the money that was appropriated last year been spent?
It has been spent. I don't know if we've come into requisition. The process in terms of hiring the A&E, I think we made our request back in like February of 2022 and actually got the firm through the hiring process in end of October. And then it took another 6 or 8 weeks to get DHCD to actually approve their standard contract, which was very frustrating. So the DHCD process is molasses, but the firm is hired and is working and has a really tight schedule to move things forward. So, between their work really gearing up and the fact that we have some expenditures, but we could probably report that on that.
If I
What
can,
percentage?
if I can jump in on the A&E firm just started last month, so they started burning, consulting dollars, and then there's a billing process, that we won't see their invoices before February something, and then we have to process it and turn it around. So it'll probably be more like March something that it gets set into the town. So that's just starting. That's the 1.386 million from last year. The 80 whatever it is thousand for the High Rock Homes, High Rock Estates property conditions report. That money has been completely spent at this point, and is in the process of this goes through Needham through Cambridge Housing Authority, because it takes advantage of their house doctor program. So the billing goes to Cambridge, it gets delayed there and processed, and then it turns around and gets billed to us and so forth. And that's just starting to, that has been expended, but not maybe completely sent to the town finance.
So this
Department.
pre-development budget is based on approximately a $40 million project. It's like 2.6 million. $40 million project.
Yeah, particularly the phase one construction, that $435,000 that would cover the construction drawings and bidding is based on the 62 unit,
Yeah.
40 million.
My gut feeling
project.
is that that's a low number. I mean, I don't know how it was developed, what kind of scope of work we have.
I mean, it's, DHCD has their methodology of how they size the budget. Not included in the price is any kind of construction administration services, so it really is, the master plan that A&E zoning is for a full scope project that includes both Linden and Chambers, but the A&E, that second line item on slide 15, the 435 is sized specifically for that 62 unit development.
So my final question is, looking forward to this fall and, design of the project. Where do you see is the biggest risk moving forward in terms of schedule or?
Probably,
Is it the zoning?
I'm gonna go right to the zoning.
And what's the risk of not getting the zoning?
Can I address that
Yeah.
question? I think that's, yeah,
It's a local question.
it's a local question. So, so there's always a risk. We know that. However, it was very encouraging that this was the #1 priority in the housing plan for this particular section for the town of Needham that got approved by both the planning board and the select board last month and has been sent into the state. So I take that as and both the planning board and to some extent the select board know what we're looking at here. This is where we're going. And I should also say, and we have an expert across the table here as well, but I should also say that it is also consistent with the overall MBTA Community Act analysis that's been done for the last 14 months by the Housing Plan Working Group, which is going to be focusing on adding additional density in the corridor of zoning changes that stretch between Needham Junction and Needham Heights. So, I think it's consistent with at a general level with where the town is heading, and of course the devil's in the details.
Is there anything else out there that gets your view?
The zoning is a big one, and zoning, as I mentioned, is key to kind of unlocking the gate or the door for state funding. But the attractiveness of this effort, I think, would be something that the state would get behind for sure. It would just be a question of time. And again, I think timing right now is in our favor because of all of the American Recovery Act funding and Inflation Reduction Act funding that has been made available to the state, and the priority that the state is given for that funding to be designated for housing. I'm really optimistic about access. And again, Needham is a community that I know the state would love to see and go affordable housing, as you guys would see as well.
Margaret, can you speak up, please?
I'm sorry, and I would just add to what Reg was saying is that it's been my experience, working on housing authority projects in Cambridge and in other communities that oftentimes they're seen as a real upgrade to what's been there. And that's not to say you get carte blanche, you don't. You have to make sure you have a well-designed, well thought out, appropriately scaled project. But if you achieve those kinds of things, you're hopefully you're going to build, the consensus that you need to manage through a successful zoning process.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dave. All right, so now Jean McKnight.
Yes, I have several questions and I feel a little bit lost when it comes to the CPA funding and how it's being presented here. So let me start with that. What do you mean about FY 2023-02, 1 million? And then FY 2024-01, and that's what we're talking about now, right? This year. And so I'm looking also at page 5 of the report, and it says CPC funds awarded 1386 FY 23. So there you go. 1386. And those were all the items in that budget that was awarded last year. Right?
Correct.
So now we're talking about an application this year for 1 million, 1 million for, no, excuse me, 2 million 602.
No, you're looking for the amount that we're requesting this year is the third column, that difference column, that 1.216482.
Oh, thank you. I did not understand that.
Right.
Okay.
And so maybe
So your expenses that you estimated when you applied for the 1,386,000
Mhm,
have to be higher, and that's shown on the second column.
right.
And so the difference is 1,216,000, and so you're asking this year for 1,216,000.
Yeah. And I
But
I
that's
can
not
sort of,
quite right either, right? Because the scope of the work of the request has changed. So
Yeah.
there are some increases in costs. And they're asking for additional money for additional tasks. But the two are kind of interrelated. And so therefore they came in and explained to us. And in fact, they haven't really spent anything on the 1.386.
I see, because I see in the first column, 0 for this and 0 for that. And
You know
then the
what?
second column,
I mean,
monies for that. So
right.
that means,
And I'm sorry, I usually don't interrupt like this, but the other thing is if you look at the narrative, because it's always numbers and narrative. So if you read the narrative point that actually summarizes it really easily, which is the 23 request was for pre-development costs to receive zoning approvals, which included schematic designs. And the 01 request asked for additional things, which
Okay.
is essentially bring the whole project forward through obtaining financing,
okay, that's helpful. I didn't understand it before.
construction finance.
Okay, and now I want to ask, I know low-income housing tax credit, Peterson mentioned is a source of funding. I'm no expert on this, and don't think I am. But aren't they used for privately owned projects? Do they get used for public housing developments?
more
No.
and more so, they're being used by housing authorities as a means to recapitalize or reinvest or add to a portfolio. But for a long time, you're correct that I think it was more private developers or, community development corporations that were using the low-income housing tax credit program.
So there has been a change in their regulations that allow.
Not in the regulations, just in the urgency of needing to use whatever access to funding that you have. And really the federal program for affordable housing, really the only program that has any meaningful money is the low-income housing tax credit program.
Yeah.
And
That's what
so,
I've heard,
yeah, and so, housing authorities are needing to really lean into that program to actually, access to capital, otherwise units would be lost.
So this restructuring, you'll be able to get different forms of money, but in the end, the development, Linden Chambers, will be owned by the housing authority.
So
Is that correct?
It will be, the underlying land would be owned by the housing authority, but to access to tax credit, you're right, the property would need to be owned by name only by the entity receiving the tax credit benefit.
Okay, so
they
there
would
is a
own,
private ownership element involved.
right, but the private ownership is only in for the economic benefit from the tax credits. They're like a silent partner. The day-to-day operations would be maintained by the housing authority as the managing member of that tax credit ownership entity. So usually you create a limited liability corporation that would have the tax investor in it, and usually an element of the housing authority. So there'd be two parties in that. The 99.99% member is the person getting the economic benefit from the tax credit. But then who manages that entity is an entity of the housing authority. And the housing authority would continue to make the day-to-day decision. The tax credit equity investor is in it for their money, and they need to stay in for the period of time that they're getting the economic benefit, which could be as many as 15 years. But then after that 15-year period, they exit the ownership, they leave their 99.99%. And if you've done my job and you've done it well, then it comes back to the housing authority.
So how is it arranged, wearing my sort of, real estate lawyer hat?
Yeah.
The land is owned by the housing authority.
Yeah.
And is there a ground lease
A
to the
ground lease.
LLC?
Yes,
But then also a management agreement. So even though
Back
the
to the
ground
housing
lease
authority.
is to the LLC, there's a management agreement.
to the housing authority, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
And,
so-
you do, I mean, so part, I've done, 20 of these different transactions in my career. And, what I do, because my primary interest is to protect the interest of the housing authority, really at the end of the day, protect the interest of the people who are the residents of the affordable housing, because you never want to risk somebody's home. And so you do this belt and suspenders approach of putting in a number of different protections to make certain that the homes are protected and that the path of it returning to the housing authority is as rock solid as you could make it. So, we work with outside counsel, which is why you see a legal budget in there to make sure those belts and suspenders are put in. And so one of the first belts and suspenders is never give away the land. Because, once you keep the land, you've got some level of control.
So then at the end of the period of time where they have to, the LLC has to be in the game, then at the end of that period of time, whether it's 30 years or 20 years or whatever, then the ground lease ends and it's all back at the housing.
Well, the ground lease doesn't, the ground lease will be for 99 years. What will end, yeah, what will end after either 10 or 15 years is the interest of the investor being in the tax credit entity. And so then they would exit either through a sale to the house, back to the housing authority, or through the transfer of the partnership, the 99.99% interest. And what you do is you structure the transaction so that the cost back to the housing authority is nominal. So we actually, in Cambridge, just took back 177 unit property, and it cost us $10,000 legal fees to get it back. But
then you have, you own everything, the land and the
we own
buildings.
everything, right? So then we can eliminate everything.
That's what I was kind of
Yeah,
asking.
so you can collapse it all back
But
down.
it won't necessarily take 99 years to
No.
do that, even though the lease
No.
is 99
Yeah.
years, it will take a
Right.
shorter period. of
Right, so the
time.
building, we in December, we took 100% ownership again of the 177 unit building. So we had the 0.01%, now we have the 99%, and we have the ground lease. So it's all in the name of the Cambridge Housing Authority. And
Well-
so that's how you structure the deal, is to have that become, be your end result, but you got to be smart about it.
Yes, well, I know people often accuse me of being in the weeds, and I feel like I'm really almost lost in the weeds here, but I very much appreciate that explanation because it really helps me to understand what's going on here. And now I'm going to go in the direction of zoning. Is this all to be senior housing?
At
In
Linden
Linden
Chambers,
Chambers?
yes.
Yes, it's all going to be senior housing. Okay. Well, as Reg knows, because he participated so much in the housing plan working group, the town is very focused on complying with the MBTA communities law and the guidelines. But we decided that rather than proposing reusing, we're using a template for our rezonings throughout a kind of spine going all along Highland Avenue and Chestnut Street
Mhm.
of 18 units per acre. That's insufficient for this.
Correct.
Even if you keep it at what you've got now, it's a little bit short.
Yeah, it's
I think you,
non-conforming.
I was doing the math and I think it's 18.5 units per acre you have now. But of course, the redevelopment, if you did the maximum, it would end up being a little over 30 units per acre. So that's exactly what we expected. So we said, would you, in our housing plan, we didn't put forth any proposed rezoning for this site because we didn't know what your needs were.
Yeah.
Now seems like we do know what your needs are. And your timing on your zoning fits with the timing of the zoning changes we want to make to comply with the MBTA Communities Act. And that is, we're looking at the 2024 annual town meeting, May 2024.
Mhm.
It seems like that timing fits with your timetable as well. If you were to get rezonings accomplished by the process of going through town meeting at the May annual town meeting of 2024, that would work for you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it would, we'd have to look, I mean, I think we'd have to really study whether or not it would make sense to wait for the May 2024, what that would do. So typically DHCD does one big funding round a year. And they start that process in October, November, with usually the final application in January. You have to do a pre-application, and part of the pre-application that you do in advance of January, they ask, do you have your zoning in place? And so if we're waiting until May of 2024 to go to town meeting, they'll likely say, well, you're not a good candidate for this, for the January 2024 funding round. You'll have to wait until the January of 2025 funding round.
Well, there is, this town always has a special town meeting in the fall. However, this town has a tradition of not dealing with them. We don't want to deal with zoning in the fall. We only want to deal with budget items. And the timetable is very, you need a good 3-month lead time
To work through the
to
entire
finalize
process.
the zoning. We just did that for accessory dwelling units rezoning. We wrapped it all up last night. It's going to the select board. They send it back for a hearing, and you really have a long time frame before you actually, and that's for this May's town meeting. And here we are, in February. So I don't know. It seems doubtful that you can really pull this together for a fall annual town meeting, even if everybody was cooperative.
Yeah, and so
about
then the
it.
question would be, and I don't know what the answer is, because we'll have to do the
Special
work,
edit.
and we'll have to do kind of a conversation with the town to figure out what might be the best path. And the best path may be town meeting in May of 2024, or they may come back and say, do the local initiative approach, or there will be 2 or 3 different paths that we'll explore.
It
And-
might be a
and-
good idea to explore, be going down both paths. And get the select, because the select board is the gatekeeper
Yeah.
for the local initiative program, and at least get to the point of getting the select board behind it. Maybe not yet going to the zoning board of appeals. And that's the other reason why I think it would be beneficial to the town to actually do a rezoning at town meeting. Because we have to go through a very detailed study using GIS and using very complicated definitions of the guidelines of DHCD on what land is excluded. We can say, oh, we're rezoning this whole big area, and so therefore we need all your guidelines. Oh, no, they're going to pick out, oh, no, that's excluded land because it's wetland. That's excluded land because it's this or that.
Right.
So that we could take these 8.2 acres and add them to what we're doing already would be very helpful to the town in meeting the
other-
MBTA community goals. It would be, but it's not easily done because that template of 18 units per acre that we're using doesn't fit here.
Right.
So we have to come up with something else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
But those would be absolutely the conversations and guidance that we'd be looking to have, from the conversations that we're having with the select board, with planning board, with, zoning, or however, but those won't be done in a vacuum. And-
May I offer comment?
Sure, brief.
Brief one. So if I recollect, Gene, however, and I'm no expert, obviously, but there may be a problem of piggybacking what we are doing on the MBTA zoning changes that will be done, say, May 2024, because there are restrictions in the MBTA Communities Act that prevents you from designating any part of an MBTA zoning change that's going to be approved by 50% of town meeting. There's restrictions of designating it to just senior housing or.
But,
just some
but actually,
category.
that's a misunderstanding
And
of
it
the
may be,
guidelines. The zoning needn't say anything at all about any requirement, other than we're trying to have at least 12.5% in every area zone for multifamily housing. But that doesn't mean you can't have 100% affordable.
I
you
defer to
can-
you.
yes.
I'm no expert. I'm just saying that was one.
So, no,
one-
that's not a barrier, it really is not a
Okay.
barrier. And I think, I think working together with the planning board and the select board in helping us to meet the guidelines as we go along through the zoning we need for this, the 8.2 acres might help quite a bit, because it is within the half-mile circle of
Yes.
Needham Junction transit station. All right, then my last question, I'm shocked by the amount of money that's considered needed and that's put in the category of master planning and zoning. There's more detail in the report than there is here, but it says you've got Linden Chambers pre-development on page 3, and that comes up to the 1406250. But only one line of that, they've got all these bullet points, is determine required zoning relief and prosecute through approvals. But then there's all these other things that lead up to that. But why is it going to cost $1,406,000? That seems like so much money, especially when I look at legal services on page 4 of $100,000 to serve as legal counsel for assistance with seeking zoning changes of relief. That seems reasonable to me. Yeah, it probably will cost $100,000. But what's the million for?
For the design services, because you have to be able to progress the design to a point where,
well, you can show the slides to town meeting.
well, even before, but then it has to be buildable. So you have to, take it through a schematic design phase, which means you do a level of due diligence and design with the, variety of different engineers and mechanical, electrical, and structural to show that it's feasible and viable, and it's gonna look this way, because zoning is gonna approve that look.
Yeah.
And you can't change it, so you've got to make sure you can deliver it. And so, it's been our experience that you have to get all the way through that schematic design phase, and then again, the site design actually has to be even a little bit further than that piece. And the overall fee for a project of this size will, if it was just if it didn't include the full master plan of the entire 8-acre site in both Linden and Chambers, it would be a lower fee, but you are looking at both locations and coming up with what you think your overall master plan is going to be for the entirety of the 2 parcels. And so I think the fee, DHED tends to be a little bit tight on the fee in some ways. If I were to actually have gotten competitive proposals, I think I would have seen something a little bit higher.
It's like 8%. To me, that's very low.
Okay, well, I understand what you're talking about. We just went through
Yeah,
the
but maybe we
rezoning
can
of the
provide-
Muzzy site and, all the designs that they had to do and then redo and redo to finally get the zoning past town meeting. I suppose that's what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and every time they do that, they have to make certain that it's built, you can actually build what you.
And,
Yeah.
and the one thing you should realize about this MBTA zoning is the development has to be by right. Like with the Muzzy site, they get through town meeting, yes, town meeting approves the various height limits and setback limits and FAR limits. But then you have to go to the planning board for the special permit. And there's hearing after hearing after hearing continued and finally a decision.
Yeah.
There's no such thing if we're going to comply with MBTA communities.
Yeah,
It has to be
as-
by right.
Right.
So town meeting is the one who looks at it and says, yes, but to the extent to which you can put in your locals, in your zoning, every single thing about the siding has to look like this, that's not gonna happen.
No, it's,
Yeah, so it's just really showing people a concept to town meeting of what, it will look like if it's at this density, is what I mean.
yeah, I mean, I think we were thinking, I mean, it's one thing to go through kind of a rezoning where you're not really being held to a standard of this is what you're gonna build.
And that's what I'm saying.
Right, and so we've been assuming that we're going to a zoning process of you're gonna be held to build what you present. And so, the fee is reflective of
Yeah.
that.
Well, I think certainly you need that kind of, but maybe not to the extent you think. It
Yeah, I
depends
mean,
on
if
which
you're going-
direction
if
you
you're
go.
doing
So
a-
I know
right.
I'm taking a lot
No,
of time.
but I understand what you're
But we
saying
have
as
enough.
well, that if you're going through a zoning process where you're changing the underlying zoning. And you're coming up with height and you're coming up with, setbacks and things like that, you don't have to have the level of detail that
Yeah.
I'm assuming we think we
And-
need to have.
And I'm forgetting to mention one aspect of this, even though there wouldn't be a special permit process, there would be a site plan approval process.
Yes.
And that's very similar
That
to a
is very
special
similar,
permit
yeah.
process, so it's not that different.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, Rick Simone.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Margaret, thank you. In company there, you've done a tremendous job of putting this together. And I want to thank my colleagues on the committee because Jean is a lot more knowledgeable about zoning than I am, but she was really helpful in hitting some of the points that I wanted to discuss. As I looked at this, as we're kind of stepping back, because I was one of the liaisons, and looking at it, there is the biggest concern with the project, from my perspective, is risk. It's a timing risk, scheduling risk, if you will, and then there's the financial risk. And from a scheduling risk, I mean, I think Jean very eloquently pointed out that already the schedule that you've got embedded in this project, which calls for zoning to be completed by the end of this calendar year, if my memory serves me, that's not going to be achievable, particularly given all of the things that Jean just talked about. So I think that if that's the case, I would suggest that what we probably need to do is go back and relook at this from, and show the effect of the what the impact would be on a longer zoning process in getting approvals, because as you said, you can't go forward with a shovel-ready project unless you've got all the zoning approvals already in place. And that's just from one end of it. The other end of it is, as you look at that, schedule-wise, I was having a conversation with Reg before the meeting about how much time it takes to go through the process with DCHC or whatever the acronym is, with their involvement in the project. And he was explaining to me that even to hire the consultant, it took a lot longer than originally anticipated in the schedule. And with their direct involvement, which apparently we need, because they're one of the major funding sources and we're not going to get approved unless we get it. I just ask that we take another look before we get too far down the line, take another look at the schedule and perhaps build in some contingency in the schedule itself. That's number one. Number two is related to the scheduling is also some of the cost factors. And again, I'm no expert on federal government, but ARPA money, I believe, is one of the big discussion items when it comes to cutting back on expenditures to solve the debt crisis. And I keep hearing that proposed as one of the things the Republican Party wants to do is to rescind all the outstanding ARPA funds that haven't been spent. And how does that, if it ever were to come true, how would that impact this project from a funding perspective? So maybe we ought to be looking to shift some of that ARPA funding more up front than holding it in place and perhaps losing it down the road. The other aspect of it is, as we get into this and some of the funding, you look at the project and you say, not all of this money or the sources of the money are guaranteed. You've got the state who has to approve this, very similar to the way the state approves the building of schools in individual cities and towns. And like we just went through this with a few years ago with the Sunita Williams School. And now we're going back and looking for money for Mitchell and Pollard. And they're studying about which one should go first and whether we can get funding from the state and are other cities and towns going to bump us out. And they've got all sorts of requirements for funding. And I'm sure, and Margaret, you can kind of chime in here, but I'm sure the process is very similar with funding for these things. I mean, maybe, the city of Boston has, 12 projects that they want, and they're going to bump us out of the line or push us back. And we may not get funding, even though it might be a very merit-based project and we check off all the boxes. This is the little town of Needham. It's not the city of Boston or the city of Framingham or, wherever it might be. Just comment on that if you would.
I think that they really look to spread the money that DHC does around the Commonwealth, and they really, limit what they give to some of the larger cities. And that results in the larger cities having to kind of figure out other creative ways to move forward some of their agendas. I think the projects are the things that, the project itself, I think, is the thing that will attract the funding. If it's a good, solid project and there's a need, and what stands apart about this project versus other projects that would be creating new housing is the fact that it would be replacing obsolete, defunct state public housing. And part of the process to bring the state to the table is also to show them that you're going to use a different type of operating subsidy so that the state will no longer have any responsibility either in operating side or on the capital side. So they see it as, a way to liberate themselves from a responsibility while seeing that those existing units be upgraded, protected, and preserved. And then as the icing on the cake, geez, you're also getting a substantial number of brand new units as well. And so it becomes a real attractive package to the state because you're solving a problem they haven't been able to solve, which is what are we supposed to do with the state housing? Because we can't fund it, but we want it. And here you're potentially finding a way to, switch off the need to rely upon state funding. And that's really attractive. And, DHCD puts a lot of money on those kinds of deals. And I can point out any number of housing authorities that have jumped the line because they've actually had that kind of transaction. And again, you're also, you're addressing a fundamental need that everyone identifies, that the housing isn't working. And then you're adding brand new units and you're letting you're getting the state out of having the business to, run state public housing in Needham. And that's, that's like all aces, or however you play in poker, whatever the best hand, a royal flush.
Yeah, no, Margaret, I appreciate that. I guess, do we get any type of correspondence or anything from the DCHD that tells us we're a prime candidate, or, I mean, how does that, what can we get to build that confidence other than, your experience?
Forward and hire an A&E firm is a pretty good indicator. I mean, we, presented the case that there was a path forward, using the allocations that Representative Garlick got, and, the CPA commitment for them to say, all right, yeah, we see you have traction. We're going to say, yes, you can move forward with an A&E selection firm, because we have confidence that there's something real here. I mean, I think that's probably the best measure that you're going to get. Now it becomes showing and proving out that the confidence that they placed in you wasn't misguided or misaligned. And I think that's the challenge of the next 6 to 9 months is getting the design right and figuring out the path for zoning and showing how the numbers are hanging together. But I, based on my analysis of the transaction, in the years that I've been putting these together, I have a lot of confidence in it, and,
Good to hear.
and that's, part, that's part of, I think the state relying on, the strength of your development team, to be honest, as well, because, we've had a track record of assessing and these types of transactions, and then, putting it together and actually realizing them. And so, that gives us a little bit more credence when we do come in the door with something that we have some confidence in. And again, the kudos again to Representative Garlick for putting us into that position, because
Right.
having those funds was a game changer, as
Yeah.
would be having the federal public housing operating subsidy from the repositioning work from the balance of the housing authority activity is a game changer. And you're looking for those, and you're looking to really lean in on those and build your project from that. And then, the end of the day, it's going to be about the community of Needham, and, whether or not that, they're going to help find a path forward to the zoning that the property will need to be what it can be. And that's going to be a balance between, getting the right design, getting the right density, getting the right look. I mean, it's a whole factor of different things, but I have confidence in the architect that you've hired, that they're going to get us to something that you all will want to support and be very proud of. And then that will give the rest of the energy that the project needs for us to then attract, tell the story and attract the funding. And again, you've got all of the elements, with the, relief of the state public housing program, with the community support, with the activation of the federal operating subsidy. All of those things are going to be catalysts to getting the funding in place.
Great, Margaret, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Margaret, thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the timing, and I will tell you that I'm very, very, very concerned about the risk that you're asking CPC in the town to assume at this point. Because I'm going to summarize it, and you tell me if I'm wrong. But as I understood it, last year, we came in for the request that was 1.386. And it was there to develop schematics and get us through zoning. And when we were through zoning, you would be able to submit an application to DHCD and know whether or not there was viability on the project itself, correct? Now, what you're doing, and I know why, by the way, you've accelerated, and there was no discussion last year about who was going to pay for the construction documents.
Right.
None. So my hunch is that it was probably going to be, you're probably going to use the 1.25 ARPA funds from Am I right about that? Or is that just going to be baked into the financing that you're going to get as for the construction?
That was gonna be baked into the
So it's baked
financing.
into the construction
Yeah.
financing. So now, in order to accelerate the project, you don't have that in place, and you're asking the town to assume that cost and assume that risk. So now our risk is not 1.386, excuse me, 1.386. Our risk is 2.6 on the front end, without any assurance that we're going to get funding for the project. So we're doubling down on our risk. And we also, and so that, I actually don't think that that's a fair proposition. And I'm troubled by that. I'm happy that you are reassuring us that we will likely get funding. But I've also been doing some digging and looking at on my own, and it is a competition. It probably doesn't adequately compare to applying for school funding.
No.
Because there are challenges, and you've been frank with us, which is great. We've been frank with us about the challenges around getting, funding and financing, and that it is a competition. So I'm going to use this I'm going to throw out an idea. One of the proposals that you have, one of the ideas is that, because I asked these questions, by the way, the follow-up questions are mine, I'll reveal myself. I asked a question about why is it that, can you use the 1.25 ARPA funding? And just for the committee to understand, we're using ARPA in two different ways. There was an original there was money through the original tranche of ARPA funds that Representative Garlick was able to designate and to Linden Chambers for 1.25 million. There is now another large sum of money sitting at the State House that we haven't resolved how we're going to distribute it. And it could be used potentially for things like redeveloping our housing. So we're using, ARPA is getting used in two different ways in our discussion, just so everybody understands that. So we want to use the I understand the principle that you want to use the 1.25 and the 1.5 to say to the state, we have a commitment for construction finance, right? But I think that I want the committee to understand that the 1.25 ARPA funding could be used for pre-development costs, correct? Margaret? Yes, okay. So if you need that commitment for construction financing, and it makes sense to me, I'm thinking creatively. I haven't checked with our finance director, but I think under the CPC Act, we can designate $1.25 million or we can designate the request that you're making this year, which is 1.2 million. Actually, that matches up rather nicely. We can designate $1.2 million and put it in a fund called construction financing for Linden Chambers. We can designate it, and you can hold that as a warrant in front of DHCD in the same way that you're holding the ARPA funds as a warrant in front of DHCD. And we're not assuming any risk on that because it's not going to be spent down until we have a commitment for construction financing from DHCD. And then you folks put some skin in the game by using your 1.25 ARPA funds for the other half of the pre-development costs. That way we're sharing the risks, right? And because now, and I understand too why you want to go fast. So consider that. I'm going to do the takeaway. Don't respond tonight. I want you to think about it because I haven't had a chance to discuss with our finance director the viability of that, but I think it is. I think that act allows us to have designated funds and designate it. And I think the dispersing agent at that point may become the select board. I think with CPC loses control of the money, but it sits under the control of the select board. So that solves everyone's, in my mind, it brings down our risk level. And it shows that you folks have some skin in the game too. It serves everyone's purpose. My concern really is that, when you look at it, you say, holy smokes, this is a competition and we may not win. And that's $2.6 million of taxpayer money, you know? So I think you need to think about that. And so that's a possibility. And I guess the other possibility that I thought about was just slowing the process down, which is if we were not going to get fund zoning in place until FY 2025, you may be making the same application that you're doing now at that time. And, you know, I just want to, the other thing I want to point out too is just so the committee understands this, because I think that we do have the redevelopment reserve account is unrestricted. So that also could be used for pre-development costs. And that's $450,000, right? That's
Roughly, yeah.
roughly, all right, because on the schematic, on one of the charts, it says that $45,000 for
51,000.
was, but it was represented as 48% of the
Yeah, I think that was.
reserve,
was
so that's
typo.
not correct.
Yeah, that's not.
Right, so it's 10% of, it's 10% approximately.
Yeah.
Approximately 10% of the reserve. So when the housing authority developed developed High Rock Homes, they earned a developer's fee, which is kind of a profit, which is, in relatively speaking, $500,000 on a, what was it?
It was a big project.
Yeah, but still, a
Yeah.
big project, that's the fee. We have, but it's $500,000 that was unrestricted, sitting in a bank. We haven't used it. It's there to use, you know, seed money or redevelopment costs. It's there to use to kickstart or get through the door, close the door, whatever it is. And so it's available. And then I think the other thing that, you know, I want to highlight is two other points, which is our role, you know, traditionally on CPC is with these projects is we're there. We got the financing in place. We're 2 million short. We're 3 million short. You know what we often call the plug, right? And this is not the plug. This is kind of the opposite of that. And I think that shows so that the town is ready to, you know, take a risk. But our, you know, what we envisioned is we're the plug. We're like the last, you know, we're the last money in. This is what you need to get over the hump. Fantastic. We'll write the check. But as it's structured now.
Yeah,
it just-
and I mean, DHCD on that one, I mean, they're not gonna plunge until they feel like you've got all the sources.
Yeah, okay.
And they're the last one.
Okay, that's fine
but-
too, but at least at that
Yeah.
point, though, we have a commitment from them, we're ready to go, you know.
Yeah.
Right, so, and then related to that, because I think we have to have a real conversation right now about, in this funding cycle, about what CPC in the town are prepared to commit to construction financing. Because we're seeing these numbers of 5 million to 6.4 million. I mean, what we can afford and what we give up by doing it, right? Right now, I think we've got, Reg, and we've got in our housing bucket, our housing reserve, I think we have
have the
2.8.
email.
You got the
We had
email
that-
from
we
tonight.
We just got, so right now it's 477,000.
No, that's not.
What are you talking about?
The actual, what's in the reserve.
Oh, I'm
account.
sorry, and there's, yeah, 2.6 million.
2.6 million by the end of this funding cycle, we're gonna be at 3.4. Okay, and because we're gonna continue to hit it with slugs at about $800,000 a year. So that's a substantial amount of money, but we're gonna have to talk about taking money out of the general reserve fund of the CPC as well. And so there you're competing, going head to head with other projects. And we really have to have a discussion about what we can fund, okay? So I'm glad, I understand now that you want to be aggressive on the timeline because of this potential availability of other ARPA funds. But as a result of that, and that I understand your reason for that, but as a result of that, the net effect of that is that we're absorbing a lot more risk as it's presently structured. So I think you really need to think about that. And there's some, I have some follow-up questions, but let me see if I can just, maybe I might even put them in. I guess I'll put, you gave us a list of other funding, other projects that were funded with low-income tax credits. Went back and took a look at them. First of all, the pictures are great. It's like, it really is like, it's just really a great feeling to see, holy smokes, like you can, with low-income tax credits, you can build that, huh? That's pretty cool. So it's there. I know every project is different. I know the program, the tax credit program changes a lot over time, but I noticed that I don't think that there were any of those projects that had CPC funding to that level, 5, 6 now. And also when we're saying 5 million, are we saying 5 million plus 2.6? Are we saying?
No, inclusive.
Oh, it's going to include the
Yeah.
2.6. Okay, good. So, but the most that I saw was, 2.2 for the Chelmsford project that built 130 units. I mean, it's go, and I guess I'm going to ask you this general question because this gets to kind of maybe my final point, at least for tonight. I don't want to wear everybody out, which is kind of understanding the layer cake of the financing. It's just it's impenetrable. It's like, I feel like I'm back in trying to study Article 4 and Article 5 in the UCC. Okay, the banking. It's okay.
Fall
So
asleep.
it's difficult.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask is there a reason why? Is there some benefit to having, I'm going to ask almost in a dumb way. Is there some benefit to having such a large commitment from the town on CPC? Is there a financial benefit? Like, does it attract, will it end up with higher profits to the investor?
No.
Is it because we want to keep it deeply affordable? Is that what it is?
Yeah,
That's
it's
what
the, it's the deeply, it won't change, the economics for the investor and what they will get won't change based on CPA. Sometimes, one of the things, and we were to look at, more of a detailed pro forma than, you would see a developer fee to the Needham Housing Authority. And you'll say, oh, they shouldn't get that much, but you get tax credit equity based on cost. And so I use whatever the rule is that the state has in terms of setting your developer fee. I always put it at that maximum number, knowing that the housing authority will give back a big chunk of that to the deal. So you start seeing, the elements of a Needham Housing Authority loan. Where do you think that's coming from? Because right now, Needham Housing Authority wouldn't have that resource, but it would use the equivalency of the excess developer fee to kind of recycle back into the deal. But yeah, the layer caking of the funding is, if you have to use the tax credit program because it's the only real meaningful resource out there, but it's one of the most inefficient ways of producing and supporting affordable housing.
So
But
it's,
absent what, you don't have other choices. So then it's like, how do you reasonably put together that layer cake, and how do you, with the goal of trying to have as much of it be deeply affordable?
okay, so that's one of the issues. So I hope everyone understands that, right? Which is there's affordable and then affordable.
Then
right?
there's
This is
affordable.
deeply affordable. These, okay. And you can put together a low income, tax credit project
Yeah,
that is, that's a different kind of almost moderate in income in size,
yeah.
right?
So I don't know the statistics of the Needham Housing Authority waitlist, but my experience is it matches, but 88% of the Cambridge Housing Authority's waiting list would not qualify for affordable housing. Their income's too low. And that, that seems to be, when I work with other housing authorities that we partner with, every one of them, the same story, that the folks that are on the waiting list are well below what can actually rent up an affordable tax credit. apartment without an operating subsidy. And, we can ask Needham to run the numbers, but, I would be shocked if it's any different.
Right.
And, and that's, I think you need all layers of housing. I'm not gonna say don't do it. But, I think for the intent, particularly for the mission of the Needham Housing Authority, the folks who do tax credit deals who don't have the mission of the affordability piece in the way that Needham Housing Authority, that they don't do that deeply affordable piece.
And I don't mean to be redundant. So part in one way of addressing that is to look for more significant town commitment, right? Okay, okay, good. That's really helpful to know. If you give me just a second, I may just let it go.
It's happening in it, Rich.
So I noticed the DHCD is issuing various kinds of memos. Sorry, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, but it seems I understand that the standards, I actually asked for the criteria and you gave them to me as published on the mass.gov site. But then there's some working documents which start to talk about prioritization of these projects. And I'll just reference it and I assume that you're familiar with it. And I'll just ask you an omnibus question, which is, how do you think you get fit? This is under the 2022-2023 qualified allocation plan for low-income housing tax credit program. And this is but they have this section which has to do with priorities for
Like the little matrix chart.
yeah, but it is just a bullet points about priorities for priority categories for funding. And they look for housing for extremely low-income individuals.
Qualify.
That's us. Investment in distressed and at-risk neighborhoods,
Not
us.
so.
And preservation of existing affordable housing. Well, I don't know that that's really us, right? Because I think that we use preservation in two different ways, right? Because preservation under the CPC is a defined term.
Yeah,
which
no,
is
I
right.
think they use it in a different way. You
Yeah.
have one for CPA, you have a certain defined term.
Right.
Theirs is more broader.
Well, but theirs is actually has to do with exploration of right. They're talking about preserving low income qualified housing as low income because they expire after a period of time.
But I mean, the obsolescence piece of the state public housing has fallen under that category.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
That's good enough. Okay. And then family housing production in neighborhood production in neighborhoods and communities. There are a couple of others. So we
Yeah.
kind of touch a couple of the bases. There are some others where they look at that under the ARPA funding. I think that they look at places that have been hard hit by the pandemic.
Yeah, the disparate
Right.
impact.
Disparate economic impact, which there's a lot of stuff that we don't really qualify for under ARPA principles.
But then they would argue, the opportunity to provide deeply affordable housing in a community of opportunity of Needham is correcting a disparate opportunity. So, I think it can go, it can be seen in a different way.
So I guess I do. So
But
those are
we've
my,
had property like Linden Chambers that we fit through the qualified allocation plan. So I feel like that we would score and, meet the underlying criteria. Given what I know. And again, the trump card, sorry, bad word. A real determinant is that the opportunity to relieve the state from a long-term commitment to the 152 units while, also achieving the upgrade that, we have been working with the Medford Housing Authority. They have a 144 unit state public housing site. And we worked with them to kind of do a feasibility redevelopment plan for that site. And that one was ranked the highest on a DHCD funding round. On the DHCD public housing side and was awarded a $15 million grant.
when was that?
what was,
When was that?
that was July of last year.
I see that.
So, so that, that there, and a big, the key factors there was, one, the state was getting out of the 144 units. Two, Medford Housing Authority didn't realize they were sitting on a valuable resource called their federal public housing operating subsidies. They had 83 that they didn't know that what they could do with. We told them what they could do with it. Three, we actually got them more, from another property that we're working with. So now they have 144 federal operating subsidies, so they're able to deeply afford all of them. And then they're adding 98 new units that they are also making deeply affordable using another resource that they had, but they hadn't really deployed. And so, you put together that right optics, that right story. And, we competed with Boston, Worcester, and Salem, where our Lieutenant Governor had sit on the board of the commission, and it ranked #1. And kudos to Natalie for the quality of the application that she produced for the Medford Housing Authority.
That's great. Sorry, but I'm going to ask one last question on the potential use of federal subsidies, the 108 units. I think
Mhm.
that's what we said.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but I assume that that's not the equivalent of the converting that we went through in High Rock State.
It is actually very similar to what.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so would that mean then that if we took that 108, that those units would be the beneficiary of the permanent operating subsidy, whatever it is that you get with HUD?
Yes.
So are you really saying you're ready to flip a number of those units, in 108 of them into?
That would be our goal.
Okay, that would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Right.
And then what you would do as part of that, and we just actually closed on a transaction that did this, which is you deploy those Faircloth units, or those federal public housing operating subsidy units. And then you actually transfer them over to rental assistance demonstration, which is a voucher program, and that really, lubricates the overall financing deal. So, we've had experience putting those transactions together as well.
So those units would roll off of DHCD books, or do they roll, if we do this financing even now through the low income housing tax credit, does it roll off the DHC books?
Only if you can, they would love you to roll it off, but you'd have to, how are you going to cover the operating costs of the property?
Right.
And so the key, and we've been working with, other housing authorities that don't have any federal public housing, but they have plenty of state. And, we've been trying to figure out ways in which we can build, another layer cake of subsidy to underwrite the original deeply affordable units without any subsidy, and then try to get enough other subsidy to actually get the numbers to work. Way more challenging. The federal public housing operating subsidy, if we can actually, if we can deploy them, is, as I mentioned earlier, a game changer. And
So
that,
how soon,
that to
what's
me,
the timeline on getting better information on that?
well, you want to talk to that? 'Cause you got the meeting coming up.
We have another board retreat this Saturday that you can watch. Or you
Okay.
can come and attend if you want. Actually, it's an in-person meeting. Yeah, we are going in that final decision. And it's, come down to two options. And there are pros and cons to both options. It's not easy. Also, I just want to footnote what Margaret said. Is we are also taking an overall NHA-wide look at all these issues here. And while one scenario is rolling all 108 subsidy units, federal subsidy units into the Linden Chambers and solving a lot of Linden Chambers problems that way. Remember, we also have our eye on taking 60 High Rock Estates bungalows, which when we convert them, we'll have 60 Section 8, subsidies go along with them. But if we turn them into duplexes, there's missing 60 other subsidies that we need to be able to make that project work as well. So it is absolutely a very complicated decision.
But just, also, I think that understand that the $5 to $6 million ask is a big number, right? So I just want you to understand that, and we're going to have to really think about that.
We wrote
So
it
just-
down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, those are my questions. Thank you to the committee. I'm sorry if I. or-
I would want to say one other thing, say relative to High Rock Homes, 15 years ago, which is one of the things that's driving this is construction costs that are just, ridiculously beyond
roof, so to
absurd
speak.
right now.
Through the roof, so to speak.
Yeah,
yeah.
you have the combined construction costs and increase in construction and interest.
Yeah.
So, but I just want to read my last
Please,
point,
I
which
actually
is,
thought about that one.
but I just want to read my last,
Will you get the Fed under control, please?
just the last point, which is that if we're not, if slowing down, if we're gonna have to deal with zoning, you have to consider the timing of this application
Mhm.
itself too.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
all right.
made
I
note
just-
of
Those are
that.
my 2 points that I want you to think about. okay?
We're about to have a preliminary meeting at some point, hopefully this month with the planning board.
Okay,
And we have one tentatively on the books with the select board this month as well. We're starting to try to get some, real time, in real life, as they say, feedback from the planning board and the planning department as to what makes sense to them.
all right, good. Now, what we want to do is start lightning round. I know it's late, it's a big project. We don't have a lot of projects in front of us this year, so why don't we stay with it for a little while longer? Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. And we first hand up is Dave Harris. And if you wave or use the hand up function, I'll call on you. Okay. But Dave's hand is up. He gets to ask the question.
Yeah, I just have a.
Excuse me, do we want to take the presentation down just so we can see each other's?
Oh, yeah, let's do that. They may refer back to it, but that's okay. Never mind. Okay, there we go.
Natalie, you're front and center.
Okay.
Maybe-
All right, thank you.
I just have a general question about the financial risk, which it's taken up most of the discussion. Is it one bite of the apple?
No, you
Or
can,
or can you reapply?
you
I
can
mean,
reapply.
So there's like a schedule component as well as the financial component.
Yeah.
So, how many times could you apply? And in other words,
I mean, that you get, I mean, even before you get, I mean, similar to the work that, we'll be doing with the select board and the planning board in Needham around zoning issues, we'll be having conversations with the funders at the HCD and getting their input and guidance on, things that they're seeing or, how they might want to do it. And they might say, yeah, come in, and then we're going to get feedback and say, well, you didn't make it this round because of blah, 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 blah. But if you do blah, 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 you're going to be much more competitive next time. So you do get that feedback, and it's not like 3 times, it's not 3 times you're out. You
yeah, so you could look at the risk
Yeah.
as, there's certain risk in getting it done in a year. And then there's a lower risk if it's 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but the need is, the need of the existing buildings are not gonna go away.
Yeah.
And that's gonna be a driver to something happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just commenting on, the
Overall.
risk isn't absolute.
Yes.
You made it sound like it was absolute, Mr. Chair.
Well, I didn't mean to make it
Well,
sound absolute.
that-
I was
just
gonna actually
kinda-
ask that very same question.
Maybe
So-
that's a good place to start that. And then we work backwards.
But there is the risk that it is not funded, but you're right, they can reapply. That's a good point and a fair point, and I had actually intended to ask that. Okay, so let's hold on, because I think that Laura had her hand up first, and then we'll go Jean, and then we're gonna go Bob. Okay, so Laura,
I have a couple of comments. One, I cannot stay on this meeting for more than 15 minutes. I've worked all day long and I can't go through another set of projects tonight, so I apologize for that. Second of
You're not
all, I feel like last year we knew all of this. We knew about this project. We knew there was potential zoning issues. We knew there are ARPA funds available. To bring this up now tonight is very disconcerting to me after I've been spending lots of time on this with Reg and with other people going through this presentation, only to find out that basically now what I feel like is happening is that there's some sort of side thing going on that is saying we can't fund this year. And so here we have this, new, I never heard of reservation fund to do this. And we're not going to use CPA funds. I'm really frustrated by this. This is all new to me, and I don't know if anybody agrees, but I am just, it's not okay. Sorry. I don't know where this is coming from. I never heard about any of this before, and we knew about this project a year ago. There's no reason for this to be coming up now as a first-time thing, unless there's something going on that we're not privy to. And working hard like this and then finding this out tonight, I'm sorry, is not okay with me.
So, Laura, first of all, this is all the beginning of a long process. This is the very beginning of this process. And
With all due respect, Peter, it's not. It started last year. It probably even started the year before,
okay, I'm talking about the application that's in front of us now.
which is related to the one that came last year. Very similar. Sorry, I'm not gonna.
Take your okay, we'll take that comment, all right, all right, so any other comments? All right, so then the next question would be by Jean.
It's a quickie, I hope. I think if something was said about the number of new units you might have in the development, depending on relocation, and we haven't said anything about relocation. I know there's been talk about Militia Heights as a possible relocation site, just in general, not related to this project yet that I know of, but what are your ideas for relocation, and in what way is the availability of relocation related to the number of units you might do here, the new units?
Yeah, I mean, relocation will be a challenge because of the limits to what's available in Needham for relocation, because there's only, for senior housing, there's only C beds across town that would be available, and that has a limited number of units, and even less that become available over the course of the year.
Yeah.
And so I do think you're never gonna, I wouldn't think it would be prudent to tear down the entire 72 units all in one shot. Even if you were to finance one construction project, you would, let the project, so the contractor would start and do this phase and these number of units, so that you can then move people from that section of the site into the brand new units. Because trying to find 72 homes, I think, would be beyond capacity, particularly, respecting folks' needs to stay in their community. So you would look in terms of resources, you'd look at C beds, you would look, chambers probably would be also available. We'd look to see what kind of Section 8 vouchers that the Housing Authority might have available. I think that would just be under one hand, under 5. And then you would probably build into the development budget a program to provide subsidy, so that we would be able to support individual households in 1-bedroom private market housing in Needham. If we don't have, the Section 8 voucher to support them, we would have to come up with on that kind of a local subsidy or a relocation subsidy that's funded through the development program to do that. I'd look at, I haven't done this yet, but I would have my team look at the potential of, somebody has a fire in their house, they get a relocation trailer adjacent to the house. I try to think about if there are possible locations that we might do that. But it is, past zoning, relocation is another big, challenge.
Now, the Militia Heights property that the Charles River Association has the right to buy, I guess now, is that too long-term to serve as a relocation facility for this project? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I do know. I haven't had.
So I don't think
conversations with them.
there's been no conversations at all with CRC since last March. I do know that they bid on the property, but that's all I know. And
See, I thought they'd been
and
more.
those units are not ready to go.
No, they
Though
don't.
they would need quite a huge amount of money just to make them livable. And they're not really laid out from a senior housing point of view. They're 2-bedroom units, one, that were built for military families here, so. There's nothing, I think that's, I don't think that's gonna ride in.
Yeah,
as
that's not a
magic
realistic
solution.
resource you're
Yeah,
looking
right.
at then. Okay.
But we usually look at putting together a model, look at what the traditional move out rates are from Linden, from Chambers, from Seabeds, from the voucher program, to kind of then try to figure out what would that right size first element of construction be, then to, the best thing is then to, tear down 28 units and replace them with 62. All of a sudden, now you've got 62 units that, not only bring back some folks, but then you've got the resource to move the balance. But it is, something that will need to be, carefully considered, and, something that we'd work closely with, the resident community to plan for. We have a whole set of protocols of actually coming up with a written relocation plan and working with or assigning to each individual resident a resident coordinator who would work with them, because not every resident has the same set of needs, wants, or desires, and so being able to work independently with a relocation coordinator has always been a real key to our success. I think at this point I've moved over 2,000 people to do modernization work on the projects that I've touched. So having we figured out some tools of the trade that really are responsive, I think, to the needs of the resident community, but also, meet the needs of construction, and you try to make certain that you do it in a thoughtful, compassionate, and sensitive way.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand what you're planning. Mhm.
Peter?
I
Yeah,
advise
Peter.
that- Yes.
Yeah, it's just Rick. I just wanted to provide some clarity for Jean. Because I can speak directly to the question about the Charles River Center. The current status of that project is that Charles River Center has been awarded the bid. And the problem is that the federal government can't set up an account for the money to be transferred to, and they're working on that. And so everything's been held up until such time as they get that account in place. And then this has been in abeyance now since the fall of last year, and it's now February. And they're still anticipating that the closing might not even take place until the end of the month of March somehow. I offered to give them my account number and they can use that, but nobody seems to want to do that. So
Gee.
Okay, Jean, any other questions?
I'm all set now.
Okay, so now, Gina, we're gonna get you after Bob, because he had his hand up before you, and then we'll go to you, Gina. Okay, Bob.
Thanks, Peter. So back to zoning. So there's sort of a range here, I imagine. We have current zoning, and we have the zoning that is desired for the max units that we potentially want. Is the A&E firm, or is your team looking at things in between? Like,
Yes, yeah.
how many units we can get with this zoning change, how many we can get if we don't get any zoning change? Like, all right, good. That's all I want to
Yeah.
hear. Good.
Well, you're not going to get much if you have no zoning change. 'cause-
Understood.
There's
Right.
nothing you can do under the current zoning.
Yeah.
You're already way above the
Yeah,
density of
yeah.
the current zoning.
Could we rebuild something? So you'd have to have a blank lot?
Well, it's very, I don't understand how the housing got built in the first place without a
we don't-
zoning change.
All right.
It may be that back then there was a concept that the housing authority, being kind of a creature of the state, was exempt from local zoning.
Okay.
So they could just go ahead and build. But this development it's like this public-private partnership. I don't think that concept would apply.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, good. Dina?
Yeah, thank you. I just have a two-part question, very quick. I guess the first question is, of the current of the current housing that's there, how many are all units 100% occupied? And then my second question is, regardless of when this moves forward, is this, I mean, this is my opinion, this absolutely needs to be a number one priority in town. Is this kind of at the top of the priority list?
So top of, I'm not sure I quite understand. that.
So
Top-
as far as like, and bear with me because I am fairly new to this.
The head of Claxton Field, McLeod.
No, as far as like if there was a top three of things that are going to happen that cost this amount of money that are needed in town, this I am assuming is in the top three of correct, or am I?
So, we
I can-
have
I
tier,
can take
we
that
have,
question.
we have tier financing, so internally within the town, the housing authority is not considered part of the town, it's not part of the budget, it's an outside agency. And within the town budget, we have different tiers of capital financing.
Right.
I don't think that this is on a tier one financing, it's not necessarily included there.
That's what I
Right.
was asking. Yeah.
But you've heard a lot of different expressions of support, including with the new housing initiative. And we've always had a placeholder in our capital plan, in our CPC capital plan.
Yep.
We actually rank it as tier ones. Rick would know the details of that because it's not a housing authority. The housing authority is not a department in the town. But
Okay, yeah, that's what I just couldn't think of the verbiage, but it's tier one now, so that's what I was asking.
we have a placeholder in our CPC financing plan for, I don't know, it's not necessarily for this amount, but it's for significant amounts of money for Linden Chambers and other redevelopment for the housing.
Okay, thank you. And then, as far as occupied, is it fully, are all the units fully occupied right now?
Yeah,
So
we're,
I'm gonna have Reg answer that question, and then she can dovetail on what I said and maybe correct if I say about the financing. Go ahead.
yeah, no, yes, we're above 95% or 96%. You have just organic turnover. People have to leave for a higher degree of care, and that goes for Seabed's Way as well.
Okay.
Another way of answering your question is we've got a little over 1,000 people on the waiting list for our little tiny,
Wow.
small, studio apartments for those, on the official waiting list. And about 280 people on the waiting list for the Seabeds and Cook. I'm sorry, the Seabeds, the 46 units that we have at Seabed.
Wow.
Then I totally agree with Peter's answer, which is one way of looking at it, which is, from a town capital priority list, Needham Housing Authority is sort of created, we're not completely separate from the town, but we're not part of that town planning process. But another way of answering that question is for deeply affordable housing, which is what Needham Housing Authority does for Needham. We were the top priority in the 2007 housing plan. It was called the Affordable Housing Plan back then. And, for redevelopment back then. And it was rolled over into the more recent 2023 plan that was just approved last month.
Okay, thank you.
May I quickly add something?
Sure.
As part of the development of the housing plan, we had many community forums. We had 3. And then there was an additional forum the last fall by the League of Women Voters a year ago. And at every forum, people would offer that a very important priority is the initiatives of the Needham Housing Authority. It generally seems to have a great deal of support in this town.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? on FY 2024-01. We're going to close our discussion. Thank you, Margaret. And
Natalie.
Natalie.
Natalie, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Rich.
And perhaps we can let them. get
Oh,
to
yeah,
dinner.
I think you should head home.
Yeah.
And start
Natalie
working
works
on your
for me.
next spreadsheet. Okay. All right, I think I want to figure out a way to kind of, we're running a little late and worried people are getting a little short.
No, I'm going on vacation. The taxi is
don't-
coming at 6 a.m.
Let's-
tomorrow morning.
let's-
It's
let's-
taking a long
All
time.
right, let me move, I'm gonna move through quickly some items. Okay, let's see. Okay,
And but we are. solid on Friday, so-
okay, so I don't know that we need to do my updates on our other 4 applications that we've basically given us, right? We're gonna know a little bit more after we meet with all the committees on Claxton Field. We just recently received the Fazio Playground due diligence questions. Gene and I did an on-site, by the way.
Did you have the zebra thing or the bouncy? horse?
No, we didn't, but it was,
I went there too.
good, Dave, nice job. Okay, so, and it was helpful. of
Yes,
course,
definitely,
right?
to
Okay.
hear, to be there and be able to ask questions when you're standing right there.
Yeah.
At the site. Mhm.
Okay, and Seabeds Cook, we're gonna hear from the Housing Authority team. Hopefully Margaret's gonna be here and is Steve gonna be here next week, maybe?
Yes.
Great, okay. Cheryl Gospel, is she still on? Or did she stay on? I just want to thank Cheryl for being there, and that's it.
I think she found out.
Okay, just let her know, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that, how about that for summarizing applications? Good, okay. Due diligence questions we don't need to address. Updates on CPA plan, let's put that aside for now. Okay, we're gonna have probably a shorter presentation next week. But if you, Gene, if you want to bring something up in terms of structural and things, why don't we discuss it briefly?
We discussed it, well, I've organized materials to try to put together the part of the housing plan, but I haven't actually sat down to write it yet. And I was noticing today, I was like, it's only 2 pages. You can do this, but there's so much. I'm trying to incorporate what's in the housing plan. And I remember I would always say, as a lawyer, I'd say, well, if I had more time, I would have made it shorter. So taking a lot of material and trying to distill it into a list of what are the priorities, I'm finding a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to take this, it's the only file I'm taking with me on vacation.
I'm happy to hear this.
All right.
That file should feel privileged.
Good, I think you're right. It takes some time to turn 32 pages into 2 pages or whatever it is. And then
200 pages.
200 pages,
200 pages.
even more time.
Sorry. All right,
Yeah.
good. I'm glad we'll see that report when you come back.
Okay.
Okay, I just, I separated out, just so you're clear about this, there's DOR issued internal guidance reports, and they issue them periodically. They issued a series of them when CPA was first became effective, but only in December of 2019, so basically 2020, did they turn out a paper, internal guidance, that really addresses the questions of eligibility under the Act. And so we struggle with that, right? And so it's probably the most active issue, other than how are we going to pay for it. First question is it's eligible. And I put that out to you folks so that you look at, beginning, you can thumb through it, but you can start to see some examples of what they say is appropriate and what they say is not appropriate. This is DOR. This is the only regulatory authority that has issued any statement other than DHCD about what is eligible for under these very nuanced and overwrought defined definitions for what can or cannot be eligible under the Act under the 4 different categories.
Well,
So-
a lot of material was sent, and then Cecilia organized it into 3 different documents. What should we be focusing on?
Well, I just want you to have it near your nightstand. Just kidding. I want you to have
Or
it as a
vacation, you mean.
resource.
Take it with me.
I want it to be, I would think it would be a resource that the committee could use going forward, along with the bylaw that we have for CPC, the statute that we have for CPC, and our CPA plan. We should be kind of looking at those things as a resource that we can do to rely on in terms of answering questions of eligibility and understanding questions of eligibility, understanding them, okay?
Mhm.
So I just think it's the only guidance out there. We basically have to live with it.
Well, thank
You
you for
might not
organizing
like
it.
it.
Yeah.
You know, it may be to some of the questions, especially around kind of support of public housing. You might not agree with how DOR has come out on what support for public housing means or community housing means, but it's really the definition that we're kind of living with, okay? So I just think you should have it, all right? And then, that's it for me. Sorry, we went so late. I do appreciate everybody's time. So any other subjects? Well, let me just raise this, I'm kind of actively thinking about this, and then maybe I'll talk to you more about it at the next meeting. You know, the one concern that I have with the application is the Linden Chambers application is that it is, in this application in particular, is really the kind of credibility of it really relies on this elaborate financing plan
Mhm.
that is really tough, difficult for the layperson to grasp. And so, you know, I think we have to understand that Margaret is, Cambridge Housing Authority is working for the Needham Housing Authority. The Needham Housing Authority is kind of not of our town, but not part of our town government. And so it's a little different than when we're then getting an application from a department of the town where you have these internal controls. And so I don't want to say we're in an adversarial relationship. If I could say it on a legal way, which is, we're kind of on, we have
What you mean.
different duties. And so I think we need to understand that. And I was struggling with that, and I'm struggling with the idea of perhaps having somebody help us and provide us some guidance on our end. It might help a lot of people, other people who are looking at this application in a reassuring way. That is somebody who's going to explain to us the viability of this plan, how the low-income housing tax credits actually work, whether or not it can work with less CPC money, whether this is spot on, whether or not this is really, the viability of the plan, and whether or not it's likely that it's going to be funded.
Who
Yeah.
would do that?
Well, I don't know. I'm open. to
Does
thinking
Karen
about it.
Sunarbo have that level of skill? She's very knowledgeable about housing.
I don't know, but we have an administrative budget. We have some money to spend on this.
Mhm.
And I want everyone to understand that I'm not saying that because I don't trust or doubt. I don't trust Cambridge Housing Authority or Needham Housing Authority, or I doubt what they're saying to us. It's just that I'm not in a position to, and I don't think I'm not in a position to completely say I understand it. And we're dealing with basically a third party. It's just, I want people to think about that. And I was going to talk to our finance director in the next couple of days about that. And perhaps get some more insight from him and report back to you folks a week from tonight. Okay, Dave, comment.
No, it's just.
Oh, you were,
I was just-
I thought you were basically saying,
I'm getting cramps.
oh, I thought you were not liking the idea. Okay.
I'm getting dehydrated.
All right, so that's just kind of, all right, just thinking about that, all right? Okay, all right, so that's it for me. Okay, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, okay.
Peter?
That's Rick.
I'm sorry, before you adjourn, maybe you could ask for discussion. My request would be that you kind of poll the members to make sure we're going to have a quorum next Wednesday. I know there's 3 of us that are definitely going to be out of the country. So I hate to bring it up at the last moment, but as I'm sitting here looking at this and the list for stuff is getting longer, I just wanted to maybe ask you to do that.
Yeah, I'm out of town as well.
And I am. I'm not zooming in either.
Okay, so the 15th, which, by the way, so we had a double header. We're starting at 5:30 and then in the joint meeting and then rolling into our regular. Okay, so bear that in mind. All right, so let's start with, well, Joe's not here. Joe Barnes, do we know if Joe is available? Let's see.
I'm, Peter, I brought it up because Joe wasn't here. I think Joe's in Florida, but I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Well, he was traveling to Florida.
I have emails from Rick, Jean, and Laura all saying that they will be out of town.
Okay, so, night.
And I apologize. I had the date. I'm actually gone for the 8th. I am around next week.
Okay,
Hey,
The 8th is today.
We get another one next month.
no, she meant March 8th.
March 8th.
Okay, so
I thought you were gone today, Tina.
Jean is a no. Is Laura a no? Laura's out of the country, right?
I'm not here. Yep.
Okay, good. And then Barnes may be a no. Who else is a no?
I looks more and more like I'm gonna be a no, Peter.
Okay, so that's 4 no's. So we have, well, I'm including Barnes in that. So we have Foster, we have Harrer, we have Dermody, we have Pingator, and so Dina, we got Hannigan. Okay. No one can stick out. Can you make it?
With a respectful request that we don't go past 9 or 10.
Okay.
I have surgery Thursday morning.
Okay, so, all right, we'll do
I
that.
need to get. and I'm
We'll
gonna be-
adjourn
and
by
I'm gonna be
9.
on Zoom.
I think hopefully next week's project is a lot simpler.
And I'll be on Zoom next week, so I can go right to bed. I'm
Okay,
serious.
you don't need to explain that to me.
I have a
All right,
question
no,
about
get up
the
early.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
the tentative meeting on, I think we had it set as a kind of tentative meeting on March 29th. Something has come up and my husband is asking me, can we do this? Can we do this? Well, I don't know. I got this tentative meeting. What's the story on that meeting?
So we put that in place just in case we usually have the public hearing on 1 week, so the 15th. And then we have a discussion in the next week. A lot of times we're ready to vote by the end.
Yeah, we only have 4 items.
We're ready
I
to
know they're
vote. So
complicated.
I'm highly, all right.
Highly unlikely. Okay, I'm gonna go with that.
I hope that's in a positive direction.
Highly unlikely, okay? Okay, so that's under, okay, so now further discussion, hearing, let's have a second, did someone second the motion? Who
Jean
made
I
the
seconded
motion?
it.
I made it,
Jean,
Jean.
okay, here, roll call vote. Germany,
I'm gonna go with yes.
Dorfman,
Yes.
Foster,
Yes.
Hannigan,
Yes.
McKnight,
Yes.
Zumbo,
Yes.
the chair.
It's unanimous.
votes
Jean,
Okay,
I have a
thanks,
quick
everybody.
question, please. Design review board coming Monday night, we're gonna have